to our today's continuous testing meetup. First of all, thanks for being here. Also, although it's summertime, so that's really cool. First of all, I would like to thank our sponsors, Source Labs, e2e Amusement, and Trendic, who always support us in having this continuous testing meetup. And also special thanks to Aurelian. He's here today, and we support each other, and he's also part of the organization team. And yeah, if you missed the previous meetups, you can visit our website, continuoustestingmeetup.com, and there you will find the recordings from the previous meetups. So before I hand over the stage to our today's speaker, I have a note on my self-behalf. So also this year, the Agile Testing Days take place in November 13 until 16. And this year, we will celebrate our 15th anniversary. And we have more than 140 sessions and during this 4 days in 10 tracks, and we have more than 600 international attendees, and you have the chance to meet industry leaders like Richard Bradshaw, Lisa Crispin, and so on. So yeah, it's possible to join on-site. That, of course, would be awesome, but also virtually is possible. So for CTM members, we have the deal of 15% discount, but this is valid for on-site only. So yeah, don't miss this unforgettable event. We also have a party there, and it's always a lot of fun networking, meeting cool people, and yeah, join us at the Agile Testing Days this year. If you have any questions to that, you can contact our events team via events@trendic.com, or just ask me. And also for the code, just take a screenshot, or you can ask me for it, no problem. And now I would introduce our today's speaker. This is Louis Prescott. He's quality engineering lead at Cera Care, and he's located in UK. And his topic today will be creating contract and API tests for microservices from Cypress, end-to-end tests. So, Louis, the stage is yours. I stop sharing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. Really looking forward to sharing with you some of the things that I like to talk about. So, yeah, as mentioned, we're going to be talking about contract testing and how to create them from our Cypress tests. And this is a tool that has been acquired by SmartBear, but they coin it bidirectional contract testing. So we'll dig into that a bit more later on. My name is Louis, and I am quality engineering lead now at my arrows aren't working. How do I go back and forth on here? At Cera Care now, and yeah, previously I've worked for companies like ASOS in the UK and Cancer Research UK, doing a lot of API testing along the way. And so, yeah, I've kind of picked up quite a few different scenarios, which I'll talk about later, of where things can go wrong and how to rectify them. Also, in my spare time, like on the side, I work with online courses. So I've built some online courses for Test Automation University. And also, I have a podcast which talks about contract testing. So if you want to check that out, I'll pop the links in later. So why are we talking about contract testing? So I read this article which described how the popularity, which is the blue line, of microservices has been going up over the last 10 years, say, and then the red line, which is monolith applications, has kind of been plateauing. Obviously, it's still relevant in certain circumstances, but yeah, the reason why we're talking about contract testing is to do with microservices adoption, and they coined it the new unit testing, which I think is a bit of a reach, but I think hopefully throughout the talk you'll kind of identify those scenarios where you can apply contract testing. And so to give a bit of context of where contract testing kind of fits in, is within a monolith application where you are using APIs and potentially you're making one API call, the data is collated, and then it's returned to the user or the service. This was traditionally done as kind of one call. In REST, you wait for the response and then the data is provided. Whereas obviously in microservices, we've split out those domains. And so we've distributed some of that data. You may need to make multiple API requests, or you have a layer on top with like GraphQL, for example, which will then obviously collate all of those things together. So the complexities of microservices come in when you've got those distributed systems, and how do we isolate our tests? Within that, we test the individual service. And so this may be multiple teams as well. So you may have multiple teams that own different services. And so at this point, then things like communication, things like ownership of the boundaries of your tests all start to come in. So these are the kind of reasons why contract testing has come to the fore. So some of the possible questions that you may experience in your testing work, or these are some of the things that people have asked me in the past. So when you've got lots of clients or lots of consumers of your services, then how do you know how they're actually using it? You can look at the logs, or you can obviously reach out to the team if they're within your organization, and then come up with that diagram yourself. You want to reduce reliance on end-to-end tests. Maybe they take a long time to run, or they're potentially flaky. One of the big questions that I get is, you want to start using contract testing, you're not sure where to start. So hopefully today we'll kind of jump into that. And then contract testing doesn't replace your other types of tests. So we'll dig into the theory, but ultimately you still need, this is just another layer. So just some questions to think about. Hopefully you can relate to some of those things, which we'll cover today. So what I would like you to do is go to menti.com or scan the QR code and enter the number here. And I just want to understand what you know already, and also what kind of challenges you have working with integration tests. So jump into the survey, and we'll come back to that later in the talk. So I'll just leave that there for a minute. But yeah, I'd just like to kind of get feedback from the audience to see how their experience looks like. I'm obviously speaking from my experience, and working in quite a few different organizations, but mainly I've worked in a kind of healthcare space within startups. I worked for a large online fashion retailer, and then for a charity as well. But obviously everyone's context is different, so I'd like to see what different people have experienced over their careers as well. So this is current situation, but I should say previous situation now, because they've just started a new job. But so come into my organization and they say, oh, we've got lots of these end-to-end tests. And I said, oh, that's great, let's have a look. But actually the term that they were coining end-to-end wasn't end-to-end, because they were mocking out the API requests. And so obviously they weren't making those calls to the backend service and eventually to the database. And so we couldn't coin them end-to-end. And the test that we were doing obviously then didn't reflect the production-like environment, and the mocks often would not be updated if the API version was updated. So we kind of dispersed from and differentiated from our end-to-end tests, which were fully integrated, and these kind of component level integration tests. But to provide a little more context as well, some scenarios that I've had in the past, which have been down to like API contract changes that have caused issues. So we had a bug that was in production, and we had two versions of our API. So we were supporting two versions, one for a legacy system, which was an internal kind of customer support portal, and then the version 2, which was used by our mobile and our web application. And so supporting the two versions obviously comes with challenges. We didn't have any kind of contract testing set up. So we purely had our integration tests and then our unit tests as well. So we were supporting these two versions, but we made a change to both versions, which we assumed would not impact any of the downstream systems, obviously wrongly, but we made a change, changing a field from optional to mandatory, and then obviously that impacted our consumers. So version 1 of the API, we rolled out the change. The legacy system wasn't sending that field that was now mandatory, so obviously their request started to fail. The mobile and web app were unaffected because they were already sending that field, but obviously this causes a lot of issues. The legacy system had a large release cycle, so they couldn't just release a hot fix straight away. So yeah, it was quite a big impact on that. Another area where kind of contract testing would come in and help us in these situations is we had an API response. One of our consumers was relying on that field, no matter what the value was, even if the value was empty or was a null value. And so what this piece of code is doing is basically stripping out the null values from our API response. And so this was causing issues to our consumer because they wanted to make UI decisions based on the entry within that field. So these are just a couple of scenarios where kind of contract changes had a huge impact on downstream systems. So to kind of understand a bit more about what a contract is, so Martin Fowler gives a very good description. We are testing the external service and verifying that it meets the contract expected by a consuming service. And we're doing that at the boundary. So we're not making the request out to that service. We're doing it at the boundary, passing that in the form of a contract to the integration, and then they can use those requests. So it's like you're implementing your mocks, but you're actually providing that mock to the other team, and then they can use that in their testing. So the way that I kind of describe contract testing is like you're flipping integration testing upside down, or you're switching it in reverse. So any kind of integration that you are doing, whether that's API or via events asynchronously, contract testing is providing the scenarios from the consumer's perspective. So the consumer drives the testing, and then the provider service, the integration, is running those tests. So it's kind of reversing the ownership of those. And as I mentioned, Packflow, they've got a great resource, which kind of explains in more of a technical way how it works. So Pact, which is an open source contract testing tool, provides a mock provider. So spin up a mock server, which is able to intercept the request. And at that point, it can then respond with whatever you input as your expected response. And at that point, it creates your contract. So it says, this is what the request looks like, this is what the response looks like, and then that forms your contract. At that point, then the provider can take that contract, the simulated consumer in the diagram, and they can replay that against their own service. So at no point are the two services reliant on each other. They're purely using this contract that sits in the middle. And the provider verifies whether that meets with how they've implemented it. And so what are some of the benefits that you get out of doing this? You can run them independently because, as I mentioned, there's no dependencies. Gives you faster feedback, so you can share the contracts during the CI process, and you don't need to wait for the integration environment to be available. They're stable because they're using mocks, and then they're easy to maintain. They sit right beside your code base alongside your unit tests, so they become easier to maintain than your end-to-end tests. And then they give you confidence to release. So the whole idea is to de-risk that microservices kind of challenges that I was talking about at the start. And so this slide is just to demonstrate that it also supports events. So it's not just APIs, we can also implement contract testing for asynchronous services as well. And one of the main points that I like to demonstrate is contract testing has tools which facilitate the process, obviously. But the main benefit that I see from it is the communication and the ability for teams to communicate when they are distributed, when you're working with complex applications where you've got lots of different consumers. And so to put an example to this, I've heard in the past people using Word documents. Obviously, I've not heard that for a long time now. But when you're using things like wiki pages or generated Swagger documentation from the code, obviously, all those things rely on keeping those up to date, making sure that the generated code matches with that OpenAPI specification that you potentially created before development started. So yeah, the challenges of having a wiki page which could be misinterpreted or have missing information or be out of date, communication is key for teams to keep that under control, and contract testing tries to kind of provide that information, that additional like stack trace, if you like, to demonstrate where those kind of integration challenges are coming from. And so to kind of give you the different scenarios specifically which fit into the different sections. So from a contractor perspective, what we're talking about is your data structures within your requests and responses, the HTTP codes. You can obviously simulate your happy paths and error conditions, anything to do with request headers, your API versioning. So one of the key use cases for contract testing is being able to maintain those multiple versions and seeing who's using those, and like your backwards compatibility within those. And then it also provides you with kind of stubbing functionality, so you can use that as part of your component level testing, if you like. And then on the other side, integration, we're talking more about stuff which is the business logic. So if there's any kind of generated values within your response that you want to check, that's when you would test those. If you weren't already doing that at unit test level. Anything that obviously relates to data storage. So in the contracts, we're simulating via a mock. So anything which communicates with your actual storage needs to be tested integration. And then anything to do with configuration, server errors like 500 errors or whatever, understanding how your application is going to behave in those circumstances, and then anything to do with performance. So hopefully this just kind of puts a clear picture to what the differences are and what use cases you would use at each. And then to differentiate as well, what the differences are between schemas and contracts. So the way that I kind of like to look at it is your schemas are kind of your static testing, if you like. So you're making sure that the how the response data or the request data is being constructed is correct, and then the contract is doing the dynamic testing of making sure that both sides have used the schema appropriately, and does it at a deeper level. So the contract can do it to a level which has more complexity. And then schemas are looking at loose data types. That was what I was trying to say there. So yeah, and then where does it all fit in? So what I like to use to demonstrate this is the testing trophy by Quincy Does, but contract testing just fits in there a little bit. So yeah, it's kind of trying to move more of those kind of fully integrated tests down to the contract level, where you can test all of those HTTP responses in a controlled way and a more reliable way. But I don't like to talk too much about the levels, because it's not necessarily to do with it's how you want to implement it and how you want to test it. And it very much depends on the context. Cool, so let's jump back to the survey that everyone participated in. So hopefully I've given a super brief overview of what contract testing is, and hopefully that was just a refresher for some of you, but some of you learned a little bit. Yeah, so I was talking about consumer-driven contract testing, and we're going to move on to talk about bidirectional or kind of provider-driven approach. And yeah, cool. And so, yeah, what kind of challenges have you faced in your experience? And flakiness is usually the top one. Some performance issues. They're time consuming, slow feedback. So hopefully I've addressed some of those and sold you the dream of contract testing. Cool. So we're going to start talking now about the, did anyone have any questions up to now, by the way, in the chat? Are we good?
In the chat for now, no.
Cool, great stuff. So yeah, we're going to start talking now about bidirectional or kind of provider-driven approach. So one of the kind of biggest things for teams, and I think one of the challenges for teams to adopt contract testing is the kind of learning curve and the the fact that you've already got lots of tests, or you've got integration tests which do the same job. So the overhead of converting those to a different type of testing may not be the smartest solution. Or you want to adopt contract testing, but you're getting a bit stuck in implementing it. So hopefully Bidirectional can offer a way to do a bit of both. So some of the benefits, again, testing earlier, not needing a dedicated environment, increasing our confidence, visualizing the consumer behavior, and verifying your contracts in isolation. So what we're going to be walking through today is just the this diagram. I mean, it looks more complicated than it is. Basically, what's happening here is that we have our applications, our consumer, and they're using mocks. So say you're using Cypress, which is our example. You have fixtures in there, or you may be storing mocks somewhere else, and you're using those to mock out the API requests because you don't own that service. That service may be a third party or something like that. So you've got mocks to stop those out. You're using those mocks within your tests, so the tests are now stable and reliable. But then when you get to the integration environment, you need to run some additional checks, or you need, or the integration isn't set up correctly. So here we've got our consumer tests that are using mocks, and then using Packflow's bidirectional abilities and adapters, we can then generate our contracts from our mocks directly, and then obviously pass them over to the provider. And on the provider already has a Swagger documentation set up. So they already have their contract, if you like. So what the bidirectional facility does is it gives the provider the opportunity to test against their existing open API specification. The tests then verify the specification. The results of those then go into the broker. So the broker is where the contracts are stored. And so yeah, the mocks which are now contracts will also be stored in the broker, and then Packflow does a comparison between the open API specification and the results of those tests against that, and the contract that was created, and compares those and checks that the open API specs conforms with the contract, and the provider has verified those. So as we described earlier with the contract testing, of how the consumer creates the contract, passes it to the provider, they can just replay those requests on their side. They're not doing that here. What they're doing is verifying the requests against their own specification, and then Packflow is doing the comparison for you. So this is a way to enable you to use your existing tests, your existing mocks, and be able to implement contract testing without that burden of having to duplicate some of your testing to start with, or that kind of additional learning curve of learning how to create contracts from scratch. This allows you to kind of piggyback onto what your existing testing infrastructure, and enables you to create some contracts from there. So Packflow provides the adapters, and also they have plugin functionality now, so you can create your own. So some of the adapters on the consumer side, so you can use mock service worker if you're using that, wiremock, playwright, and Cypress. So without further ado, let's have a look at some of my code. So I've got a Cypress test here. And if we ignore the setup stuff for now, so what the test is doing is it's visiting this website, and it's a website that returns songs based on URL. So the top songs of the artist. So as an example here, we've got Ed Sheeran, who's a local artist to where I grew up. So we make a request to get the songs of Ed Sheeran, and then it displays the list. And I'm using a fixture here which has my list of songs. So whenever we make this request to any URL, then it will return this list. So this was all working very well. My Cypress tests were all looking good. They ran in the pipeline, and as I was mocking out the data, I didn't need to have any dependencies on the API team. But what I wanted to do was turn this mock into a contract, which the API team could verify. So using the bidirectional functionality, I just had to add in a couple of packages. So what have we got here? So we've got the Packflow Cypress adapter, which allows us to do that. So if we look in the Cypress config, so I'm now pulling in this adapter as a plugin, and that is being loaded. And this is what listens and generates the contract from our mock. And then I import the package, so I have the commands that I need to run as part of my test. And so it's just two things that I needed to do within my test. So I set up the contract. So what these are here are, this is my consumer name and this is my provider name. So when it creates the contract, it will use those. And then instead of waiting, so before I would just do a side.wait and then I would wait for the fixture to be returned. Instead of that, I'm using the packed wait, which is also doing a wait, but also generating us the contract as well. So that's all I needed to do within the code to make sure that it generated this contract. So let's see if I can get it in a nicer format, maybe not. So the JSON is just, the contract is just output in a JSON. It has our interactions in there, like our path, just zoom in a bit, like our path to our endpoint. Obviously, we can make this a dynamic endpoint based on the artist. And then we've got our response data, and we've got our body as well. And again, we can make this dynamic by making sure that it just returns us of string type within the list. And then it just provides us some metadata to tell Packflow that we've created this as part of an adapter. So it knows to be able to do the bidirectional comparisons that I was talking about before. And so once the contract has been created, we then publish it up to the broker. So the broker stores all the contracts, and this is what the provider communicates with. So when it wants to publish up their side, this is how they would do that. And or this is also where all the statuses exist as well. So at the moment, this is unverified status. But if we were to look at another one, this has a successful status, and you can see within the matrix the version that has been verified, and you can also tag it and add the branches and environments that you're talking about. But if we come back to this one, so this is the contract that I was showing you that was in JSON format. This is what it looks like within the broker. And it has our consumer details and our provider details as well. So that's the broker. And so, yeah, that's it. So from the perspective of generating a contract from our existing test, obviously this is a very simple test, but all we're doing is using our existing intercept command to using that mock to be able to generate our contract as part of our test run, and then publishing that up to the broker. And then once the provider side has also published their side as well, then the comparison will be done between the contract and the Open API specification. So Packflow's motto is it's safe to deploy on Fridays, which obviously I'll leave that up to you guys. But yeah, if you want to know more about contract testing, then feel free to head to my website, pacman.co.uk, where you can listen to my podcast. I've got some great guests on there who talk about their experiences and help you get on that journey to adopting contract testing. But yeah, hopefully today you've seen how easy it is to turn your existing mocks into contract tests, and there's multiple adapters that you could use if you're using any of those technologies. And then, yeah, if you've got any questions, yeah, feel free to shoot.
There are two questions in the chat. First one from KD. Do you want to unmute yourself, or otherwise we can read for you? All right. So we're ready for you. He said, is there a free solution for bidirectional contract testing, or is it only a paid Packflow feature?
Yeah, so unfortunately the bidirectional is only paid on the paid version. You can get a free version to do a trial, but yeah, the bidirectional thing is only available on the paid version. Obviously, with Pact being open source, all that is free to use, but the bidirectional part of it only comes in the paid version.
All right, thank you. And there is another one from Fernando. Fernando, do you want to unmute yourself for the question?
Sure. So first of all, thanks a lot for the talk. I really appreciate that. And my question is, like, from your experience, how easier can be the adoption of packed contract testing with the bidirectional approach in comparison to the traditional consumer-driven approach? Like, I just had the experience to apply the traditional consumer-driven approach, so I'm particularly interested to hear more about others' experience.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. So yeah, one of the difficulties with the traditional approach is you've got to get buy-in from all the teams, right? And you've got to, often you've already got tests in place. But yeah, from the bidirectional, because you can just plumb it into your existing infrastructure, I found it much easier to kind of get those contracts up into the broker. And then once they're in the broker, then you can start having those conversations around, okay, we've had these integration issues before. I think this would be a great tool to help us achieve that, and to be able to create those contracts from your existing tests means that it's much quicker for you to do that rather than, yeah, kind of duplicating some of that effort up front. But one thing to recognize as well, you can do half and half. So bidirectional is compatible with the consumer-driven approach as well. So whichever way you want to do it, you can plumb it in together. So if the consumer wants to use the adapters, the provider wants to use the native contract testing, then they can do that, and vice versa. So I found it much easier, especially with some of my test engineers, is that for them, it's not such a mindset shift to be able to just, yeah, plug it in on top. But yeah, be interested to hear whether you think that would work in your environment as well.
Cool, really interesting. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Yeah, I just saw in the documentation some pros and cons, and yeah, like you have a perspective when you read the documentation, but when you know like how that's like in the true real world, yeah, it's different.
Yeah, and I think like you don't see the true value of contract testing until you're doing it, right?
Yeah.
So like you really, I would just say just start doing it, and then you can always move back to contract consumer driven. But yeah, without seeing the value, it's very hard to sell.
Got it. Thank you.
Cool. Great question.
I have one question. Have you heard about Mountbank?
Mm-hmm.
Or any other tool? Why should we choose Backflow, for example, rather than the other ones?
Yeah, so like the way that kind of the development cycle works is you often have those conversations up front where you define your API documentation or how your events are going to, the format of your events or anything. And we can use like open API specs up front to start our development process. You can then use tools like Mountbank to set up those responses. And I'm sure Backflow will have an adapter for Mountbank at some point, if they don't already. And you can get them to set up all of your kind of mocks, and they can do it in a very clever, dynamic way. The difference with contract testing is you are passing those mocks between teams, right? So either, I guess, if a team is using the same Mountbank instance that is returning those mocks, then they could potentially have the same source, but that mock is still a mock. And yeah, the difference with the contracts is that it's being replayed against the system, and the mock becomes a real request that is being sent. So hopefully that answers your question, but like, yeah, the mocking tools are really great to kind of at that start of that development process. The second you've got multiple versions of the API, you've got different consumers using the API in different ways. Tools like Mountbank, I think, could get very complex very quickly, and you could lose sight of what is a contract and what is yeah, just the mock. That makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Any other question, guys? Okay, then I will ask another one. Do you think it's ever possible to use a pack flow between a company and another one? I mean, we always struggle with external integrations. Do you think it can work?
So I had this conversation a couple of months ago with, with some guys who were doing the same thing. So the conclusion that we came to was that it was definitely possible if you have open communication with the other team. Like if they are sending you pre-release versions of the API, if they are sending you open communications about when the next version is going to be coming out, then absolutely. Like there's no reason why, as the consumer of that third-party API, you could say, here's a contract, right? Like, and you can put some proxy in front of your broker so that you're not opening it up to the whole world. Absolutely, it's possible in that scenario. I think obviously when you've got APIs which are kind of just making changes completely rogue, you only know about the change once it's in production, then it's going to be like the value is pretty much gone at that point. And then the other scenario that I think could be possible, I've not done it myself, but I think it could be possible, is with bidirectional, if they've got API specifications which are in open API format, then you could use those, right? So you could create a contract from their, well, not create a contract, you could publish their open API specs to your broker, and then you could run your contracts against those. So with bidirectional, I think that scenario would be possible.
That would be nice. Anything else works?
So hi, hi, Luis. Thanks for the session. I have a similar question, kind of. So the scenario that we have currently is the consumer is a Java API, and the provider is a legacy system which has SOAP calls, basically XML formatted responses. So like, can we use Backflow in this scenario? And like, is it even the bidirectional, is it possible in that case?
I'm not sure if SOAP is supported. I'd have to check. But yeah, I mean, as I mentioned about kind of contract testing, the tools are one part of it, but actually the process is you can create a custom solution for it, right? So in terms of, like, I've done it before where we had database processes. So we obviously didn't have the kind of ability to wait for a response. We had to query, like, poll the API, poll the database for once the processes had finished. So what we did was we stored the contractors in GitHub. And so we just had a bit of Node.js code, which would publish the contract based on our mock again. And that was from the consumer side. And then from the backend side, which was polling a database, but you could do the same with a SOAP request, is it pulls down that contract from GitHub and then it runs whatever processes it needs to run, and then it can check the response on their end. So you can implement the steps of contract testing in whatever solutions you like.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, it seems not. Louis, thanks a lot for sharing your knowledge and your experiences. I would take over the screen if this is okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Let's see there. Okay, and thanks to the community for your awesome questions. Really, really cool to bomb the speaker with questions. That's always a good thing. So yeah, Louis, if you have more topics you would like to share with the community, of course you are always welcome to be here again. Just let us know, and then we make that possible, of course. All right, so like every time, this meetup is recorded and will be online during the next days. Just visit our webpage, continuoustestingmeetup.com. And what's next? So our next meetup will be in August, the 24th, and we will have Vitali here with us. And his topic will be dog fooding, eating our own cooking for quality assurance. That's a really interesting topic because I'm a dog owner and it sounds really cool, but unfortunately I'm not here the next time, but I definitely will watch the recording. So yeah, don't miss it, and hope to see you all there. Thanks a lot for being here this time, and I wish you a really, really awesome evening. And yeah, go out, enjoy the weather a little bit. Depends how it is in your location. And yeah, thanks for being here. And bye-bye.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.